Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really crucial question if you're thinking about your BIR, your basic instrument rating. What does your aircraft actually need to be legal for IFR flying under the EASA rules? Let's try and cut through some of the airfield myths. Yeah. We're going to dive into the EASA Part NCO minimums, the instrument requirements, but focus on what really counts in, your typical GA cockpit.
Exactly. And it's more than just ticking boxes, isn't it? Compliance here is absolutely fundamental. We're talking safety, reliability, especially when you're up there single pilot IFR.
Right. Flying solo in the soup.
Yeah, exactly. You have got to trust those gauges. And what's interesting is how Part NCO tailors this safety net specifically for non-commercial ops, which is most of us in GA.
Okay, so let's get into it. For someone prepping for the BIR or maybe just wanting to fly IFR more safely, where do we start? What are the absolute core flight instruments?
Well, the heart of it really is your gyroscopic instruments. You need, number one, a gyroscopic or equivalent attitude indicator, your artificial horizon.
The main one for telling you which way is up when you can't see anything outside.
Precisely. And, I've heard people wonder if a fancy GPS could substitute. EASA says, nope, you need that dedicated attitude reference.
Okay. What else in the gyro group?
Then you need a gyroscopic heading indicator. You'll be cross-referencing that constantly with your magnetic compass, which, let's be honest, can get a bit lively in turbulence.
Ah, yeah, the compass dance.
Right. And finally, a turn and slip indicator, or maybe a turn coordinator, that gives you your bank and, crucially, your yaw information, helps you make nice, coordinated turns.
So you're not skidding around the sky.
Keeps things smooth, essential stuff.
Okay, gyros covered. Attitude, heading, turn. But what about the numbers? Speed, altitude, climbing, descending.
Right, the pitot-static system basics. You absolutely need an airspeed indicator, naturally. Then, an altimeter, and it must have that barometric subscale so you can set the QNH, the local pressure setting.
Which makes sure you're actually at the altitude ATC thinks you are.
Critical. And a vertical speed indicator, your VSI. Helps you manage climbs and descents smoothly without chasing altitude all the time. And don't forget the good old magnetic compass we mentioned. It's usually your only non-electricating backup.
So in the cockpit for the BIR, you're constantly scanning between these gyros and the pitot-static group.
Constantly. Think of them as your senses when you lose the outside view. How fast, how high, which way, and are you turning nicely? That's the core scan.
Makes sense. But IFR isn't just the basic instruments, right? There's other gear needed for the whole environment. Comms, nav, maybe stuff for bad weather.
Exactly. You need pitot heat.
Yeah.
And potentially anti-icing or de-icing, depending on the forecast conditions. And a key point on pitot heat, it's not just for when you see ice. You can get invisible icing in clear air at certain temperatures and altitudes that'll block that tube right up.
And kill your airspeed indication? Not good.
Definitely not good. So pitot heat is pretty much non-negotiable for a reliable IFR. Then comes a two-way VHF radio, obviously. And honestly, having a second one, often a real lifesaver if number one decides to take a break.
Good point. And navigation.
Navigation equipment suitable for the route. That might be GNSS, like GPS, could be VOR, maybe DME, depending on where you're flying. And in most controlled airspace, you'll need a transponder. Mode S is pretty standard now, telling ATC who you are and your altitude.
Okay, instruments, pitot heat, comms, nav, transponder. What about power and lights? Especially if an IFR flight gets you back later than planned.
Absolutely essential. For day IFR, position lights, nav lights, and anti-collision lights are required. Plus, a reliable electrical power source for everything. For night IFR, it ramps up. You need proper interior lighting, enough electrical juice for all the installed electrics and nav gear, and even things like spare bulbs and fuses, accessible in flight if possible. Little things, but vital.
Wow, spare fuses in flight. Okay.
And two more often overlooked items. A way to measure outside air temperature, OAT, and a clock. Hours, minutes, seconds.
A clock seems basic, but I guess for timing holds and approaches.
It's vital. I remember a student nearly busted at check ride because his watch battery died mid-approach. Simple, but critical. Examiners check you know the lift, but what really matters is that it all works reliably when you're actually flying in cloud. Your life can depend on it.
So let's pull this together then. For anyone on their BIR journey, understanding these EASA minimums isn't just, exam fodder. It's about making sure your aircraft is genuinely a capable, safe IFR platform. It really empowers you to handle tougher weather and complex airspace confidently.
Yeah, it does. And that actually brings up maybe a final thought for people to consider. Beyond just having the equipment bolted into the panel, how does your own proficiency with using these instruments practically? How does that truly define your readiness for IFR, especially when you're solo and things don't go quite as planned.